Heard about the story. By the way, this is not a microphone, it's just a recorder. So that's why you're not hearing in the back of the room. So if you want to, why not just come a little closer? Because I don't have a voice of a Baptist preacher. I'm going to try and do it tonight, but I don't have that kind of voice. I sit in the back of a microphone. We have to speak real nice and soft, which is the way I speak. Ever heard about the person who was about to speak and he said, when I've been speaking for a certain period of time, take this pin and stick it in my leg? And after he'd been speaking for so long, the person stuck the pin in his leg and he kept on talking. He said, when he finished, when he did a speech over 10 minutes, he said, why didn't you stick the pin in my leg? She said, but I've been sticking, you have 3 pins in your leg now. And he said, oh, that's my false leg. You should have put it in the other one. So he had a cork leg on one side. Let me say that when Shavana Lee Dean got in touch with me, Professor Felix and Brother Laverne, Father Laverne, and my associate over here, Trevon A. Patton. And he has been my associate in Investing in Being Human himself, and Portia Duncanson, who volunteered over these many weeks to, what they say, rebrand some of the things we're trying to do in Investing in Being Human. But I got this wonderful email from Shavana Lee, who has a wonderful voice, which she was sitting up here a while ago. I don't see her now. There she is. Come forward. And she's a wonderful representative of yours, Professor Bethel. She said, Dr. Archer, bring brief remarks on the topic reaching out, focusing on people in the community. And you can speak a little about investing in being human. So thank you very much. And I'm going by your instructions of a brief remarks. I'm going to try and hold it as brief as possible and not Professor Felix's marks, which is a major address. Now, whenever I say that, I do just the opposite of what I'm supposed to do, but I'll try and stick as brief as I can because I'm so impressed that we can have a room full of wonderful human beings at this time of a Sunday afternoon. But Professor Bethel always tells me, he always says that, this is the Sabbath and we begin our week on this day, and so this is a place for them to be. I would also like to say how enthusiastically I endorse Professor Felix's work, whatever he's involved in. He is really a modern-day Bahamian prophet. And remember, prophets are always 2 or 3 steps at least ahead of us. They can see things we can't quite see at the time. And I'm comfortable with him because my 45 years as a Methodist minister, ordained Methodist minister, ordained 45 years ago, they always say, I can't quite figure out Colin Archer. He seems to always be 3 or 4 steps ahead of us. But anyway, we're going to give him a try and try to stick with him anyway. So I understand, brother. I'm going to try and keep up with you because I know what that's like. And I'm going to support, as far as possible, the Jericho Road experience. It's amazing how we're all linked as human beings, isn't it? When I hear about your son, Reno's, I ask, what is your son's name again? Reno Roll. I say, now that rings a bell. I have a 43-year-old son who is, as they say today in a genteel way, intellectually challenged. When he was a young boy, we used to call it mental retardation. They go through lots of fancy terms, slow learner and the like. When I lived in Jamaica, where I started, and Kevin was born, myself and my wife, 2 Bahamians, started out in Jamaica with 7 churches, straight out of college, Father Laverne. So I know you feel like a Haitian coming to be in a Bahamian situation. Our housekeeper was holding our son, Kevin, who's 6'2", 190 pounds. So when I look up to you, I have to also look up at my son. She was holding him like this, and Kevin, as boys often do, when you hold particularly boys, I can tell you, in your hands like this, hold them real tight. Because unlike girls, they have a way of jerking their legs, which is what Kevin did, and pressed it against her bust and catapulted out of his arms. And here's Reno now, isn't he? It's Reno. And many said, Reno, just tonight, and I saw pictures of him in the photo, my son, Kevin Archer, knows Reno Road. Reno, you know my son, Kevin? Do you know Kevin? He plays tennis. Well, you're going to see in one of these cuts here. Anyway, that was the end of it. Kevin catapulted out of her arms, landed on his frontal lobe, and as they say, he was never the same since. Now, if you saw Kevin, he'll be as normal as any of us, and many of you know him, in fact. He's sociably gregarious, outgoing. He'll move into any group of people. He'll talk about himself. But one of the cuts in there, in this tape, Invest in Being Human, is Let's Play. It's about my son, Kevin. Let's play. It's about putting a tennis racket in my son's hands at the age of 6 and saying, let's play tennis against this garage wall. And Kevin grew up to be, today, the world's greatest tennis player in Special Olympics. When he was 18 years old at the University of Notre Dame at South Bend in Indiana, at the age of 18, with 60 nations represented, he won the gold medal in tennis in Special Olympics when he was 18. Now, these kids may be a little intellectually slow, but physically, there's nothing wrong with him. He's not physically disabled, remind you. So these tennis players with whom he played come around the world with all their top coaches from Sweden and the United States, and he won a gold medal over 60 nations over 6 days. They play real tennis. A couple of years ago in Shanghai, China, Kevin went there just under 40 years of age, and he won the gold medal in tennis with 160 nations represented. He's played tennis in Brazil, in Greece, and all around the world. I left him home today at the Gym Tennis Club not far from our home in Eastern New Providence. Kevin has won the championship at that club with 200 members in it. The top tennis player. No one can beat him. So I only try to indicate, as Father Laverne said, that we're all connected in one way or another. Professor Bethel, all of us have had our ups and downs. All of us have had to walk this wonderful road of trying to be human. And so I say, we're not spiritual beings. We're not spiritual beings trying to be human. We're human beings trying to be spiritual and vice versa. We're always walking on this road both ways. Now, I thought I'd go a couple more minutes, maybe 5, maybe 6, who knows? Hold your breath. By using the model of, in trying to be faithful to our sister's commitment to me or advice to me, reaching on focusing to people in the community. As I started out as a young minister, Methodist minister, over 45 years ago, I was well aware that I couldn't be a Methodist minister at all, or a minister of Christ, unless I knew something more about poverty, world poverty. So that was one thing I decided to do, to focus on world poverty and what the church, the Christian church, was not doing in terms of relating to the poor. Hence, my commitment to the poor as a middle class, privileged, rather rich Bahamian, but realizing that as a disciple of Jesus of Nazareth, the human life of God, I had to have a first interest with the poor of the world, and hence his book, Poverty, the Church's Abandoned Revolution, because it has been an abandoned revolution. And I wrote a credo in this book, written in 1979, published in 1980. I believe in God revealed above all in justice, power, and love, as set forth in the biblical record, the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, the human life of God. And the credo goes on to say what I believe. Now, speaking about what I'm trying to do is show how I've tried to relate to the community and giving you a paradigm or a model, if you wish, as to how you might do so. And I want to suggest one way to do that is to have your own, what they call today, mission statement, or what I call in my day, a credo. Write out your own mission statement as to what you believe. I notice in the Jericho Road project, there is a mission statement, or if you wish, a purpose, geared toward establishing a service learning platform to the College of the Bahamas, to establish a service learning platform with the capacity to bring about social change while simultaneously developing student citizenship skills. So have a credo. And in this too, I have a spiral index like this, that gives my understanding of humanness. Man as animal, man as community, man as man, man as self, and man as one who seeks to be affiliated with the gods. In other words, talking about our spirituality, our need to be one with God and to be his handmaidens. But also I knew that if I had to live in the Bahamian society, I had to know something about alcoholism, because alcoholism has probably always been our community's number one health disease, alcoholism. And so when I came home, I got involved in forming the Bahamas Council on Alcoholism as its first president, and we started a home for persons who had left Sandilands Hospital, Rosetta House on Rosetta Street, which is still there and helps people on their leaving the alcoholic unit at Sandilands in Nassau, where I worked as a psychotherapist. In other words, what I'm trying to share with you is from the earliest in my own ministry, and I suggest you can do it for you. I had a macro concern with the poor of the earth on the one hand, and a micro concern with those who are struggling with alcoholism. And in many ways, alcoholism and drug abuse embodies our psycho-spiritual struggle, because many people who get involved in alcoholism feel lonely, depressed, dejected, alienated. But it also represents a macro issue, a situation where in the Bahamian society, more people have probably been ruined through alcoholism and later on this book, drug abuse, than anything else in our society. And so in 2003, I wrote, after working for many years at Sandilands Hospital and as a psychotherapist, I wrote this book, Bahamian Alcoholism, from 1955 to 2003, and Other Drug Abuse, 1968 to 2003, including the cocaine years in the Bahamas in the 80s and 90s. This is probably the definitive book on the subject in the Bahamas. Little known until people like Trevon Patton and others said, you know, you can't have your thousands of books just stored up. You can't write for a hobby. You have to get this information out. But it was a part of my ministry, not a part of a sales program. So again, I'm trying to develop a paradigm, giving you a model as to how you might go about your work. Decide what you want to do and catalog it. Write about it. Sooner or later, somebody will buy the books anyway. Well, you know that a number of years ago, the Methodist Church in the Bahamas was struggling for its identity. For 15 years, up to 1990, we had not one Bahamian candidate for the ministry in 15 years. And so myself and another brother, Reverend Charles Carey, said, we either have to get out of this Methodist church or to try to reform it. And at the time, a graduate from the College of the Bahamas, Don Cornish, who is now the administrator in Cat Island, had come forward as a candidate for the Methodist Church. But he was turned down by the Methodist Church in the Caribbean and the Americas as not adequate enough. He was a superb graduate from this school, but somehow he wasn't quite good enough a Bahamian to go forward for the ministry. And so we started, Reverend Carey and myself, a situation to have the Bahamas church in the Bahamas, the Methodist Church in the Bahamas, become an autonomous, independent Bahamian church. And the bill was passed 20 years ago in 1992. And many of you know about that struggle, and I became the first president of the independent Bahamian Methodist Church. Once again, that is cataloged in this book, including, and going to the micro side of my life, which I recommend to you as a psychotherapist, including many letters in here to people I felt I needed to write letters to, including to my father who had died during the struggle. And I was so taken up with the Autonomous Methodist Church, I didn't have time to cry for him. And so I wrote a letter to my deceased father in this book, to many friends, to my wife, a letter to God, and even a letter to myself. Again, it's my attempt over the years to blend macro concerns with my own internal struggle. Because first of all, we have to, as I was saying to Father Laverne a while ago, we have to make sure that as we go around trying to save everybody else in our community, we are, each of us, a part of that community, and we have to, first of all, save ourselves. I am my own worst enemy or my own best friend. Nobody can be kinder to me than me, and nobody can be more cruel to me than me. Therefore, I must resolve each and every day, first of all, to be kind, true, and good to myself. Hence, this book, Contemplation 365, 2007. The book begins this way. You want to hear it? It's a very lengthy introduction.
Speak it.
There is a very personal story behind writing this booklet. It's the smallest of my books, but probably the most important. Contemplation 365. It's a very Catholic concept, and there are many Catholic writers mentioned in it, Roman Catholic writers. Devotional readings for the spiritual life. It will probably come as a surprise to you. As early as I can remember, certainly since my mid-teens, I recognized and experienced a low-grade yet persistent and unrelenting malaise, a feeling of uneasiness, which in latter years I came to recognize as a reacting, depressive aspect of my personality. The roots of this form of depression are typically established in early childhood as familial characteristics, but may not be entirely divorced from some inherent genetic features as well. Which of us, it is said that 2 out of 3 women suffer not only depression in their lifetimes, but clinical depression, severe depression. In my case, it was a peculiar type of depression, reactivity depression, reacting to situations and find it very difficult to get over them in a normal period of time. Reactivity depression. But I speak about my struggle in this book with depression all my life, and how my devotional life, rising every morning at 4:30, and my commitment to Jesus of Nazareth has helped me to deal with depression. Now, I've tried to use these very personal things about my struggle to show that as we struggle with our own personal demons, we must also be available to reach out to the Reno Rolls of this world and Mr. Hung and people who suffer in our community, particularly as middle-class people. And all of us really in here are middle-class people. We may be upper class, poor, middle class people, but we are very privileged people. And for that reason alone, and I mentioned this in this first book, Poverty, the Church's Abandoned Revolution. Why it is and why as middle class people we must come to grips with what a Catholic priest called bafflement. Bafflement. How can middle class people reach out to the poor and most neglected in our midst? And we must learn how to do it, and we must continue doing it throughout our lives, particularly as followers of Jesus of Nazareth. And all this material has culminated in these albums. It's a 2-cassette album, Investing in Being Human. And in it, I try to struggle with these themes and struggle with my own journey as a human being in the 52 cuts in this album, Investing in Being Human. I could probably turn out another 10 of these very easily, as you can. So I want you to stick with your struggles, as many in this room have done over the years, but try to catalog your struggles. Write them down, catalog them, because each of us lives a life that nobody else can live. Each of us has a story to tell that nobody else in the world can tell. And when we're dead and gone, for the most part, that is probably the end of the story, unless we have it written out in our own words. And so in conclusion, I invite you to become a part of the process of investing in being human, of beginning first with your own life and then reaching out to those closest around you, or as John Wesley said, reaching out to those who need you most. Thank you.